Jordan, so you ready to get shooting? Jordan, can you at least hold the camera so I can... Jordan. Silent treatment, hey? Yeah. You can play at that game, Jordan. Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and as you could probably tell from the opening, I'm alone because Jordan decided to go on vacation, a camping trip, without me. I'm not bitter. I'm getting over it, let's just say that. But that's okay, I'm going to manage alone today because we're talking about the Canon EOS R10 today. Now we did already have a first impressions look, and I do absolutely recommend you guys check that video out where we look at the R7 and the R10 because that covers a lot of the stats and specs. Really today I want to focus more on, is the R10 a good entry-level camera? Is this something you want to look at? How does it compare against the competition? And just my experiences of having used it a little bit more here. I went fishing with it, stuff like that, and so I have other relevant findings that I want to share with you today. Now I'm actually going to shoot the entire episode on the EOS R10. It's recording me right now, obviously, and this will actually be an experience just to kind of see how it operates if you're just a lone user. I mean, luckily I do have that fully articulating screen, so at least I can see my composition and make sure I'm framed up properly. But also the autofocus on this camera is pretty good. In video, though, it does have a tendency, it's been known to drift to other areas, so hopefully it stays on my face the whole time, we'll see. And no tally lamp is kind of throwing me off, but I mean, I run up, I can see the red button record and then come back. But those are considerations if you are going to use this for some video production. Anyways, let's get into it. So it's been a little bit of time since I used the EOS R10 in Orlando, Florida. So I just want to start off by talking about, things I've noticed since using the camera back here at home. Took it on a fishing trip, as I mentioned. First off, the EOS R10 is not weather sealed. That was very nerve-wracking out there, wading across water with the camera in my hand. Luckily, no unfortunate mishaps. Now, as far as ergonomics go, I still love the grip on this. I love the controls, the dual command dials, the AF joystick, the AF on button. I mean, for an entry-level camera, actually, this is a very full-featured camera. It's got a lot of customizability. Really only have two gripes about the ergonomics. So first, there's a button that's located right next to the movie record button, and this locks your controls. It's a handy feature. It keeps you from accidentally adjusting your aperture or shutter speed if you're fiddling with the camera. However, you just got to tap it again to unlock the camera so you can make those adjustments. But when you are shooting actively, I find it's actually very easy to inadvertently hit, and then you have this mild annoyance where you try to do things and it says, oh, your controls are locked. Click it again and it's off. However, the other thing that's annoying about this button is you cannot customize it to do anything else, and that seems like a really strange oversight when pretty much all the other buttons are fully customizable. The other thing that I found I was doing a lot was accidentally hitting right on the control pad, just from the palm of my hand, because that grip on the back, it's fairly small, there's a lot of buttons, and so I found I was often pressing that by accident. It's not a huge deal, but again, these are just minor things that might slow you down while you're trying to work. Now let's talk about battery life now, and at this price point, none of the cameras give you exceptional battery life, but the EOS R10 is definitely near the bottom of the list. SEPA rated for 350 shots off the LCD back panel, 210 shots if you're using the EVF. Those aren't great numbers, although in practical terms, you actually do get more than that. And I think for entry-level users, casually shooting, just a weekend of photography or, family stuff, you're not really gonna have any major problems, but I would absolutely wanna have a spare at all times. LP17 batteries are pretty old batteries from the SLR days. They're affordable, they're easy to find, so definitely pick one up. Now, because the Canon EOS R10 is a compact body but with a much larger grip than, say, the Sony Alpha APS-C bodies, I like that we have real estate for the battery and the memory card, and it's away from the tripod attachment. So, even with the tripod plate on the tripod like I'm using right now, I could still easily change batteries, get my memory cards out without having to take everything off. Now lastly, the Canon EOS R10 can shoot 15 frames per second with a mechanical shutter, and I do really like that. And I like that because although many of the cameras in this price range have faster electronic shutters, none of the cameras in this price range are really great for rolling shutter using those electronic shutters. So the mechanical speed that the EOS R10 is absolutely an advantage. And certainly for some sports situations, like I was taking pictures of my friend Elliot here casting, and it's nice just to be able to have extra shots to choose from. But the buffer only lasts about 2 seconds of shooting and then it runs out. So I definitely found myself still dropping that mechanical shutter speed down slower to get a bigger buffer, to get longer shoot times. But still, if you are doing fast action, this is a nice advantage to have. No other camera can really touch it at this price point. If you want a bigger buffer, then you move up to the EOS R7. There is one thing about the EOS R10 that pleasantly surprised me. I was worried that because this is an entry-level camera, the auto ISO function wouldn't give you an option to control your minimum shutter speed. And this is a big deal for me because, especially with the faster burst rates in the EOS R10, I think having the option to set a minimum shutter speed and let the camera then just adjust the ISO automatically is very useful for sports, kids stuff, wildlife, anything where you're shooting fast action. And so I'm happy to say that EOS R10 does give the option to set the minimum shutter speed. To me, that's a big plus. So let's talk video on the Canon EOS R10 next. We've already covered a lot of this in our initial video, but let's just give you a bit of a refresher course. The Canon EOS R10 is a pretty capable video camera, shoots up to 4K 30p. Now, when shooting 30p 4K over sampled, you do get a little bit of rolling shutter. However, one of the main selling features is you can also shoot 4K 60p, and that's quite rare at this price point. You do get a 1.56 times crop factor, and you actually get less rolling shutter in that mode. So really, really nice to have. Now, both the EOS R7 and the EOS R10 have a really annoying problem in video that could potentially wreck your shoot. So it's my duty to point this out to you as a public service announcement. On both cameras, let's say you're shooting 4K and then you decide, I'd like to do some slow motion. I want to get some of that sweet 1080, 120 frame per second slow motion. Well, I get my slow motion. It's always just short clips, and I decide, okay, time to go back to 4K and just do my regular shooting. Well, I go back to that high speed shooting. I turn off that high frame rate. Am I back to 4K? No. In fact, for whatever crazy reason, the R10 and the R7 decide to then default back to 1080, 60 frame per second footage, which is very different. I don't know why it does this. It should absolutely just restore you to the last setting you were using. That'd be so much more convenient. And if you don't notice it, you're going to shoot the rest of your video in completely the wrong resolution and frame rate. Don't ask me why I know that. Now, one thing that I do want to mention as well, a particular strength we haven't touched on in this video, but we certainly talked about a lot in the first one, is the autofocus performance. Also intuitive to use, tracks really well, very accurate in photo. That's another major strength with the Canon EOS R10. As well, the sensor, the image quality is good. Canon always take beautiful JPEGs. I like the photos that I'm getting out of this camera. But that being said, when we get to this sort of 20 to 26 megapixel APS-C size sensor format that you're gonna see with this camera and the competition, I'd say that's probably the most minor difference. They all take beautiful photos. They're all very similar. I certainly like the images that I'm getting out of the EOS R10, but I like the images that I get out of the competition as well. But let's talk about how this camera now specifically stacks against some of the other cameras that you could buy. First, let's compare the R10 against the oldest competitor right now, the Sony a6400. First, let's talk about how they're similar. They have very, very similar sensors, 24 megapixel APS-C sensors. Both cameras have no IBIS. Their EVF and LCD panel stats are almost the same. And both cameras have excellent autofocus, although really Sony paved the way for excellent autofocus. Now, when it comes to video, on paper, both cameras might seem similar. They both lack headphone jacks. That's unfortunate. They both shoot 4K 24. They both shoot 4K 30, but the a6400 has a crop at 4K 30, and the a6400 cannot shoot 4K 60. So the EOS R10 really does start to pull ahead. It also shoots 10-bit video as well. These are nice advantages, but we have to consider one thing. The a6400 is getting up to like 2.5 years old in comparison. That's a lot of time that goes by. So although I would take an EOS R10 over a6400, I do think we have to consider maybe it hasn't come as far as we want it to. Now, if we compare the EOS R10 versus the Nikon Z50, actually both cameras have a very similar design setup in that they're similar size, nice grips, excellent ergonomics. The Nikon Z50 can shoot 11 frames per second mechanical mode with autofocus. Again, the EOS R10 does have an advantage there. And I do feel like the EOS R10's autofocus performance overall is better than the Nikon Z50 experience, especially more intuitive to set up and use. Now, both the R10 and the Z50 bodies lack IBIS, that in-body image stabilization, so we're on par there. But really, when it comes to video, that's again where the R10 pulls ahead. The Nikon Z50 doesn't shoot 4K 60, so again, the R10 does have some updated video specs. Now, lastly, neither Canon or Nikon have an extensive lineup of dedicated APS-C lenses for these mirrorless cameras. Both cameras do have an extensive full-frame line of mirrorless lenses that they can use on these cameras, and both companies have a lot of legacy glass that you can use with adapters. So again, in that regard, pretty much on par. So I would choose an EOS R10 over a Nikon Z50 in most situations. I feel that it is a better camera, but keep in mind the Z50 is, again, a much older camera. But now we've got to talk about the EOS R10 versus the Fujifilm X-S10. This is definitely going to be stiffer competition because the Fujifilm X-S10 is an excellent handling body, great ergonomics as well, but the X-S10 does have that big advantage with IBIS. Having that in-body image stabilization is a huge advantage for both photography and videography. Autofocus performance, I would actually though give it to the EOS R10. I just like that it's a little bit more consistent, a little bit easier to set up. And the Canon EOS R10 definitely shoots faster, 15 frames per second versus the X-S10's 8 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode. Yes, you can go faster with electronic shutter, but both these cameras have fairly middling performance with their electronic shutters. Now, when it comes to video, that's where the Fujifilm X-S10 does give a little bit of a stiffer competition compared to the competitors. The Fujifilm can go to 240 frame per second slow-mo over the EOS R10's 120 frame per second slow-mo in 1080, albeit it gets very soft when you go to 240. Let's not forget as well, the Fujifilm X-S10 does have the option for a headphone input using an adapter. That would be really handy today, and I honestly consider something like that absolutely essential if you're going to do a lot of videography. So overall, we've got a Canon which focuses a little bit faster, shoots a little bit quicker, has some very powerful video features, but we have a Fujifilm X-S10 which has IBIS and which has some better handling features when it comes to video in some ways. And so I think this might be very tough competition. The Canon EOS R10 is not exactly destroying the competition, and it is easily the most modern of all these cameras because its competition has been out for quite some time. Still, that does not change the fact that if you're looking for a good entry-level APS-C mirrorless camera, the EOS R10 does bring a lot to the table. If you're looking for like a basic sports camera or family camera, really, this would be an excellent choice. I think if you're a video creator, like, you're vlogging just like I'm kind of doing right now, it's also got some very interesting video features. I do still wish though the video focus would stay on me. I'm actually manually focused right now because honestly, it has been drifting a few shots. I've had to reshoot those, but if you want to get a better experience, I think maybe the EOS R7 is worth the extra money. Otherwise though, at this price point, the R10 is a fantastic choice. Do leave your comments below, let us know what you think. Like and subscribe to the channel, we'd really appreciate that. Well, I guess I'm alone. I'd really appreciate that today. And otherwise, I will join you, hopefully with Jordan back again, for another episode of DPReview TV shortly.